Hey y'all, welcome to the Texas Forward podcast. Our guest today is Rick Kennedy. He's currently the state chair of the Texas Forward Party. He was a Democratic nominee for Texas 17th Congressional District, both in 2018 and 2020. Today, your host, Brian Lee, sat down and talked all things Texas politics. That included things like running for Congress and how the two major political parties have used tactics like gerrymandering here in Texas, as well as what it's like leading the Texas Forward Party in year one. We hope you enjoy, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yeah, this is the inaugural episode of the Texas Forward podcast. I'm Brian Lee. Lucky for me, the first one to interview on our inaugural episode. And what better guest to have on the first episode than Rick Kennedy, the state co-chair, two-time Democratic nominee for Congress. Rick, thanks for joining us.
Good pleasure to be here, Brian.
So, you are originally from Massachusetts. And how long have you been in Texas?
16 and a half years now.
All right. What would you consider yourself a Texan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What's the biggest difference for you from Massachusetts to Texas as far as politics goes?
So, I mean, Massachusetts is pretty famously a liberal state politically. Texas is, of course, much more conservative. But the real essential difference is that Texas has been a one-party rule state for the last 25 years, happened to be Republican Party. Prior to that, I don't know how many decades, it was single-party rule under the Democratic Party. Massachusetts tends to like divided government a little bit more than Texas does. So Massachusetts, again, a very liberal area. And the state legislature is dominated by Democrats, but Massachusetts voters really like having a Republican in the governor's office.
Is that right?
That's absolutely correct.
When was if you know this, when was the last Republican governor of Massachusetts?
Right now, Charlie Baker.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Massachusetts to me, so I've traditionally followed more, national politics around the presidential election. Massachusetts is like a blue state all the way, right?
Yeah, it's going to vote for a Democrat for president for sure. But Mitt Romney, former governor of Massachusetts, Bill Weld, former Libertarian candidate for president, also a former governor of Massachusetts.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Mitt Romney would be the perfect kind of hybrid, moderate for what you just described that state to be like.
Yeah, we do like Massachusetts does like to have a moderate Republican, and I certainly voted in that direction while I was there because while I tend to be a little bit left of center probably politically, when I lived in Massachusetts, a lot of people considered me a Republican.
Yeah. Right,
because just a different spectrum that you're different environment that you're in. So I very often would vote for a Republican governor, mostly to counterbalance the heavy Democratic presence in the legislature.
Interesting. It seems like, especially with everything the Forward Party is all about, that is probably what you should aspire to. You have a little bit more of an even split there, even say in the way decisions are made.
Well, it's interesting, right? And it's actually indicative of what I just described was my attempt to balance the very left-leaning legislature, their proclivity to build big programs and spend lots of money, with a Republican governor who kind of would try to put a cap on that.
Yeah.
Right? What we see nationally is we swing left to right and right to left nationally on a 4, 8-year, 12-year cycle, right? Because most people in this country are not pure left, pure right. Most people want hybrid solutions, something in the center, what we consider the center of the political spectrum. Because neither of the two major parties actually present those alternatives, right, or that option right now, we try to achieve that option by giving these guys power for 8 years or 12 years. And then when they go too far for what the majority of the people want, we flip over and we give the other guys power for 8 or 10 years, right? 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
The problem at the moment is if that pendulum was swinging like in a grandfather clock and everything is fine and everything's in tune, not a problem. Over the last 20 years especially, that pendulum is now swinging much farther right and much farther left.
Yeah, I'm imagining the grandfather clock is broken.
It's about to explode, exactly. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, very, very good. So enough about Massachusetts. This is the Texas Forward Party podcast.
It is.
So you ran for Congress twice as a Democrat here in Texas.
I did.
Why in the world did you do that?
Well, 2016 election was a big wake-up call.
Yeah.
And as I said, I saw that pendulum starting to swing much wider right and left. With Trump winning the presidency, he ran a very his rhetoric was very, very far to the right. I felt like at that point in my life, I mean, I've voted consistently, but I've never really been politically active or engaged. And I felt like I needed to do something. And what I really wanted to do, I really wanted to run as an independent. Because I felt like, again, between these polarized far left, far right factions in the United States Congress, if we had a slug of 30, 40 independent representatives in the Congress, it would temper both extremes, right?
Yeah.
If both extremes, anybody who wanted to get something done would have to come to that 20 or 30 foot moderate caucus in the middle to try to get something done. I quickly found, though, under Texas law, there are huge barriers in place
for an independent.
an independent or even a new party, which is something that we face as the Forward Party. At least as a party, we've got the resources and the people to overcome those barriers. As an individual trying to run as an independent who is not sitting on $10 million of my own cash that I could put into the process, it was impossible. So I immediately realized that if I'm going to run, I need to have the support of a party. And I was more aligned with the Democratic Party at that point than the Republican Party.
Yeah, makes sense. I didn't know that about you. Actually had initially wanted to run as an independent. That's interesting.
Yeah, not a lot of people know that because that period of time lasted about 4 weeks while I did my research and realized that it was out of the question.
This isn't going to work.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
So was it difficult to get the nomination, or what was that process like?
It wasn't, I mean, it was difficult in the sense that, yes, I had to run on a primary. I had primary opponents. I had to campaign. I had to run against my primary opponents and win those primary elections. It was eye-opening. It was a great experience. If you had told me when I started to run for Congress that my favorite thing to do would be to go knock on a complete stranger's door and start a conversation, I would have told you you're nuts. I'm gonna hate doing that. But that turned out to be actually one of the more enjoyable parts of campaigning.
Really?
I had a little more money than my opponents. I had more experience than my opponents, life experience, not political experience. Mm-hmm. If I was, for instance, in 2020, there was a brief rumor that Wendy Davis, former Democratic candidate for governor here in the state of Texas, mm-hmm. Was going to file to run in the district that I was already running for. Mm. And if she had, I would have immediately dropped out.
Right.
Because
she's got the name recognition.
She's going to raise millions of dollars. I would just immediately have dropped out. But again, and we're going to get into gerrymandering, but this is one of the effects of gerrymandering is that in a district like I was running in, which was what's known as an R+15, R+16 district, a 15 or 16 point advantage towards the Republicans, most high-profile Democratic candidates are not going to run in that district because they know they're not going to win.
Right. It's a waste of time.
It's a waste of time. As a matter of fact, funny story, the first time I ever sat down with a campaign consultant and I told him my plan, I'm a genius, so I'm going to pull money out of my retirement, right? And I'm going to seed my campaign with X number of thousands of dollars and people are going to see how serious I am So they'll all get on board with Rick Kennedy.
Yeah.
He sat as far away as you are sitting right now, looked me dead in the eye and said, "You'll never see your money again and you will never win."
Oh.
And I ran anyways.
Oh.
Yep.
I don't know what that says about you, but it says something.
We'll let everybody else
Good things.
draw that conclusion.
I think
right.
That's interesting though. So I'm curious. The way I see it is, especially right now, you've got these, the Mitch McConnells of the world, the Nancy Pelosi's,
Yep.
and it's almost, they do have a dog in the fight. They have a horse in the race that they want to, that they're supporting, at least at the primary level. Did you have a conversation with people within the DNC when you decided to run, and they were, what was that like?
I had one conversation, not in 2018, but in 2020. I had one conversation with the DCCC because the DCCC is the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee.
Okay.
That's the national committee that works to get Democrats elected, and it's an arm of the Democratic Party. In 2018, they kind of ignored Texas completely, but in 2020, the DCCC thought they could win some seats in Texas. So they established a presence here. And I had one interview with the DCCC, and they basically asked me one question: how much money can you raise? And then they ghosted me.
They didn't like your answer.
They completely ghosted me. But just before, I can't remember what month it was. It was probably in the August timeframe of 2020, a few months before the election. My campaign ran a poll that wound up with me within the margin of error to Pete Sessions.
And what is that, 3%?
Plus or minus 3.5%,
okay.
Right? Yeah, it had me 3 points behind, Congressman Sessions. And what do you know? The D-Trip came back again.
Now, how far out was this before the election?
It was a good three, probably 3 to 4 months before the election.
Okay.
They came back reasonably skeptical that the poll might be an outlier. And what they asked me to do at that point was run a, quote, real poll, right? And because the poll that we ran was an automated telephone poll.
Sure.
And a real poll is you actually call people, you speak to them on the phone, you speak to them for 15 or 20 minutes, you ask them a lot of questions, right? And you get a much more accurate sense of what the electorate looks like.
Yeah.
And that poll came in right in line with the gerrymandering and had me down 15 points. And of course, the DCCC never came back again.
They said, that's what we thought.
That's
Rick
it. Exactly.
That's interesting. So were you the one doing the polls, or did you have a staff?
No, we contracted with somebody to actually do the poll. There's a whole constellation of consultants out there. They tend to either lean Democrat or lean Republican, and they work with Democratic candidates or Republican candidates for a price, of course, and they'll conduct a poll for you.
Now, is that something the DNC covered?
Oh no,
They didn't even cover those basic expenses.
Oh no.
Wow.
Everything we ever expended on those campaigns came out of money that I raised.
So how did you go about raising money?
Yeah. If there was one part of campaigning where ahead of time you would have told me I would hate it, and it would have been, and it was raising money, I would have said, yeah, you're right. And in hindsight, I hate it. I still hate it. You make a lot of phone calls. You meet with a lot of people, and you try to convince them that there's a reasonable path to victory for your campaign.
Right.
That there's a reasonable shot. And again, this is another dampening effect of gerrymandering, is that when people look at the district that you're running in, they see it's an R plus 15, R plus 20, whatever it is. And I had many people very frankly look at me and say, you're not going to win, so we're not going to contribute.
Yeah.
So, and I can't really blame them for that. And the national party and the state party, the Democratic Party, sort of treat you the same way. You're not going to win, so we're not going to do anything for you. Right? I want to separate that, though, from the boots on the ground, Democratic county chairs, precinct chairs, etc. Those folks work their tails off to try to help, right? But from from the state leadership and the national leadership, there's just no support at all. Again, naivete on my part. In 2018, when I won the primary and I won it outright, I really thought I would at least get a phone call the next day from the state party saying, "Congratulations,
nice job,
you're our guy." Right? Nothing, crickets.
That is wild.
Yeah,
that's amazing. It's why even run? Why even have someone run if you're the DNC? But I guess that's their view on it.
Well, and the net out of all these years of gerrymandering and voter self-sorting and all of these non-competitive districts it's like World War I trench warfare. Those trenches are dug, they're not moving anywhere, and there's no reason to invest in trying to move them because it just doesn't happen.
Right.
And again, I'll use Wendy Davis. She didn't run in my district. She ran against Chip Roy. And while I raised all of $250,000, right, and tried to run a congressional campaign on that, she raised $8 or $9 million and ran an aggressive, well-funded campaign against Chip Roy, who was only a one-term incumbent at that point in time.
Yeah.
If there was ever a seat that you would hope would flip, you get a high-profile Democrat, well-known Democratic candidate, a not deeply entrenched incumbent on the Republican side. She did no better than I did at the end of the day, right? That needle in her district did not move at all.
But see, those are the races that get all that national support. You got people in Ohio that are trying to get riled up about Wendy Davis.
Exactly.
Giving money to Wendy Davis.
Exactly. All this out-of-state money coming in.
Yeah. So obviously you won the primary. You had to be doing something right. And I'm curious, what was your pitch? How did you go about trying to convince people that you're the guy? And what did you run on? What were the things that you really wanted to bring to the table in Texas?
So, I mean, you're running as a Democrat, so you're inherently, that's your brand. You're running on the Democratic platform.
Sure.
Right? But knowing that the only path to victory that I had was to get some percentage of relatively centrist Republicans to cross the aisle, so to speak, and vote for me, I had to try to almost differentiate myself from the Democratic Party brand and run as a very, very, the most moderate Democrat you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
Right? So, yes, a woman has a right to an abortion, but, bodily autonomy and all that stuff, but at some point, there's more than one body involved here, right? So there's got to be restrictions on that at some point in time. I tried to run a campaign that was very focused on finding root cause for the challenges and proposing solutions for that root cause, right? So border security is a huge deal, right? In here in Texas. I tried to identify the three reasons people try to come across the border, right? They try to come across the border for work. They try to come across the border because they're smuggling drugs, right?
Yeah.
Or they try to come across the border because they're fleeing violence at home, right? So what are the three, how can we address each of those three root causes and take the pressure off the border, right? Because, okay, we can build a wall. Sure, we've got the wherewithal to build a wall.
Doesn't fix any of those.
Doesn't fix any of those root causes, right? And exactly. And in some places, with the wall is a mile off the border. I mean, our laws say that if you set foot on our U.S. soil and claim asylum, you're legal to be here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it doesn't address those root causes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's such a good one, though. So with the border, I mean, was there anything that stuck there that you felt like really resonated with these, the people you were trying to raise money from, or really, stuck out in general?
No. And I'll tell you, at one point, I got a very, very lengthy email from somebody, don't know who, telling me all the reasons that they weren't going to vote for me.
No.
And it had nothing to do with my positions, right? It had nothing to do with the issues that I was trying to run on. It was the Fox News caricature of a Democrat.
Right.
And that was the moment I realized that I wasn't running against Pete Sessions. I'm running against Fox News. And
what do you do about that?
you lose. That's what you do.
Man.
And
it's tough. It's frustrating.
It is. It's frustrating, right? And you're trying to push a big rock up a big hill, anyways. And even if I could have put 4, 5, 6 minutes a day of advertising on, which of course I didn't have the money for, television advertising, and even if some of my target audience saw all 4, 5, 6 minutes of that, they may then get later on immersed in Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson for 2 hours at night, drowning out the 6 minutes I might have messaged them earlier in the day.
Right. And they have that all deeply ingrained in their brains. That's the tribe.
Absolutely.
That's what the tribe's saying.
Yep.
Yeah, it seems like, what an uphill battle is putting it pretty lightly, I would say.
Yeah, that's an understatement to say the least.
No kidding. What do you make of the current state of politics here in Texas?
Rigged.
Yeah,
through gerrymandering, much of it. We've got 38 congressional districts now after redistricting. We picked up 2. So we now have 38 congressional districts. Maybe one of the 2 of those are competitive, and the other 36, 37 are essentially rigged through gerrymandering. They are predetermined outcomes in all of those districts. 150 Texas House districts, maybe 6, maybe 8 are competitive, and 31 Texas Senate districts, 1 competitive. All the rest are predetermined. In fact, Election Day is still 3 days away from where we are right now.
Yeah.
58 of those 150 members of the House have already been declared elected because they had no opponents.
Really?
Yeah. 10 members of the Senate have been declared elected because they had no opponents. Their districts are so heavily gerrymandered and skewed one way or the other that it wasn't worth, nobody would even step up and run.
Well, it makes sense based on what you just said. I was frankly kind of thinking that when you're telling the story about when you ran, it's like they're almost saying not to run. They frankly are in a lot of these cases.
Well, what they're really saying is, good luck, son. Don't talk to us. Don't call us. We'll call you. Have a good time with your little experiment there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So gerrymandering is something that, I've started to do a little bit more, doing my homework on a little bit and really trying to understand it a little bit better. But there's a lot to it. So, for anybody who might be listening to this podcast, myself included, I don't truly understand the ins and the outs like someone like yourself who's experienced it might. So talk to me like I'm dumb on this. What is gerrymandering? How does it start? Like, how does this work?
So every state, the state legislature gets to draw up legislative districts at both the state level and the congressional level. Mm-hmm. And there are ways to draw districts that allow you to spread voters who you consider to be good voters, right?
Okay.
Across as many districts as possible and maintain a 50% plus 1 advantage there, and pack voters who you don't like or who don't like you, who don't like your party, into a fewer number of districts, so that so that they waste a lot of votes in electing a representative that is of their party. So any vote that's above that you only need 1 vote to win an election, right? That 1 vote is that 1 vote that is more than anybody else got in that election. If you win an election 75% to 25%, in theory, there are tens of thousands of wasted votes there.
Wow, yeah.
That could have been in another district, right?
We could have used those votes somewhere else.
You could in Texas, it is the Democratic Party saying we could have used those votes, right, in Rick Kennedy's district, or any other district that is heavily skewed in the other direction. So And this has been around literally for centuries, almost since the start of the Republic. Gerrymandering has been around.
Okay.
But especially since the year 2000, with the advances in big data and computing technology.
They know a lot more about the voters.
They literally have hundreds, if not thousands, of data points on every voter in the state.
Yeah.
And those data points they correlate very strongly to how that person might vote. Now, one data point that we have on every voter, because it's public record, is your primary voting history.
Sure.
So if you voted in the last 20 Republican primaries, you're pretty much a Republican, right? Yeah. Same thing with Democrats. If you maybe have flip-flopped back and forth primaries, maybe you're the classic swing voter. If you never vote in primaries, you might be a consistent general election voter, but not a highly partisan one.
Interesting.
And then if you vote sporadically or irregularly, don't really expect to get messaged at all, because there's no guarantee that you'll show up at the polls.
So they're putting those sporadic voters. They're not necessarily in good voter buckets or bad. They're just like
right, exactly.
Okay.
Yep. So they'll take all that data, they'll synthesize it, they'll figure out who, what, when, and where they're going to vote, and they run it through. They've got sophisticated algorithms that allow them to model up, thousands of different potential district maps.
Sure.
And they pick the one that they think is most advantageous for them, and B, they think the courts will let them get away with.
So who is they, and how often are they doing this?
181 people here in the state of Texas. It is the state legislature.
Okay.
And they do it every 10 years based on the census.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how based on the census? What impact does the census have on it?
Oh, the census gives them all the population data. I mentioned that we got 2 extra congressional seats. That's because our population grew.
Okay.
It gives them all of the demographic data that they need, and it's also mandated in the Constitution that every 10 years you've got to do a census and redistrict.
So it's mandated in the Constitution. What do you think if you had to guess, what did the Founding Fathers intend for that to look like? Probably not quite the way it's panned out.
Well, I'd be speculating if I thought, but what the Constitution says, it's all right there in Article 1, Section 4, right? It says the states shall, I can't quote it, but the states shall choose the date, the time, the method of choosing their representatives to the federal government, right?
Okay.
Every state constitution defines how the state defines districts for their state legislature. Mm-hmm. So the Constitution basically, what the Founding Fathers did was they just punted it to the states, right? All right, you guys get to do this. Because, if we remember back, we weren't around, we can't remember, but we cast our memories back to the founding. The colonies were sovereign. They were sovereign states.
Yeah.
The 50 states that we have today are sovereign states. And they get to do. They get to draw their own districts. They get to determine everything about how these districts are drawn and how these elections are run at the state level. Article 1, Section 4 also says that the United States Congress can at any time pass a law changing all of this.
Wow.
So, you don't need an amendment to the Constitution for the federal government to impose a law that says no more partisan gerrymandering states, right? They could do that at any given moment. They don't, because they are protected by that very same gerrymandering, at least in the House of Representatives. They are protected. It's almost a wink and a nudge, unholy alliance where the states say, yeah, we'll draw districts in your favor as long as you don't get your nose into our business here and impose laws on us.
So it's just the rules to a dirty game.
Yeah, it is. It's indeed the unwritten rules to a dirty game. It's a game that favors incumbents. It's a game that the two major parties have played to sort of carve up their territory. and it imposes huge barriers on independents and new party candidates trying to win elections. It's also incredibly corrosive to our democracy, just fundamentally.
Yeah. Because there's so many people that just know, not only do they think this, but they know their vote doesn't matter, basically, in
Correct.
those districts.
Yep, that's correct.
That's not the definition of democracy, I would say, right?
No, and it certainly has led to, it's not the only cause of the polarization that we see right now, but it is certainly a major cause. The representatives who run in these districts, at least in the favored party in these districts, they know that the primary is basically the general election. That's it.
Yeah.
And that, because it's a closed primary and you're appealing to your party's primary voters, who again tend to be either very far left or very far right, and they're activists. The only threat you really have as an incumbent is from somebody running further right or further left than you, and that pulls your incumbent representatives further right and further left, and leaves a huge gap in the middle. And
that's where we are today with
this where we are.
Exploding grandfather clock.
Yeah, exactly. With the exploding grandfather clock, and the other play is the urban versus rural divide that we have right now. I cite gerrymandering as one of the causes of this polarization. The other cause that I feel, especially in the last 20 years, since the turn of the century, since NAFTA, right, is this incredible shift in economic growth, if you will, a share of the pie, the economic pie, away from rural America and towards urban America. So I usually don't like to cite statistics in campaign events or podcasts because people start snoozing when we start talking about statistics. But there's one statistic that is just truly stunning. In the year 2000, the counties that voted for George Bush accounted for 46% of our GDP. Okay, so 46% of the economy, 2,500 or so counties.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. Well, a short, scant 20 years later, the counties that voted for Donald Trump, again, roughly 2,500 counties, probably most of the same counties, accounted for only 29% of our GDP. It's just a massive shift in that share of the economic pie away from those counties.
Well, I mean, that's why those voters are so fed up. I always said this with Trump is it's like that was somebody that people voted for in spite of how, insert criticism of Trump he is, instead of because these are people that are just, they've had it. They're not being represented.
Yeah. He tapped into that. He tapped into that economic anxiety, that grievance, that feeling that they're totally neglected, right? Nobody was speaking to them, and boy, did he leverage that.
Yeah, well, no kidding.
Yeah.
So, one more question for you on the gerrymandering front. So it seems like clearly in Texas, this is Republicans dominate the state legislature.
Yep.
Is this more, from what you know about this nationally, is this more of a Republican problem, or is this kind of equal?
Given the opportunity, either party will do it.
Yeah.
Illinois is heavily gerrymandered by the Democrats for the Democrats. New York was heavily gerrymandered, but the courts threw it out, and the courts drew more fair maps. Like I said, either party will do it given the opportunity. It is more Republican at this point, mostly because of the 2010 election cycle, where the Republicans just swept state legislatures across the country, and it happens to be a redistricting year. So they held control of state legislatures all across the country and gave themselves the opportunity to redistrict, to gerrymander in their favor and just perpetuate that.
And that is not something that Fox News or the national news cycle even talks about.
No, of course not. Of course not.
That's crazy. Is that's just. I don't think I've ever heard on cable news how the state legislature balance shifted in this last election cycle.
2010 was basically a bloodbath as far as the Democrats were concerned, and the timing was so that the Republicans could entrench themselves even further. Now, again, it's not a Republican thing.
That just happened to be just big on the Republicans at that moment.
It worked out at that time. Yep.
Interesting. So New York, they shot it down, some redistricting.
Yep.
That obviously speaks to the importance of the courts, right? The people that you have in those positions. Are there any other states that you know of that are kind of improving on this or doing this in a more, fair way? So
yeah, sure. I mean, I can't remember the exact number. There are 13, 14, 15 states, I think, that have taken the redistricting process out of the hands of the legislature and given it to nonpartisan citizen committees to try to draw more fair districts. The conflict of interest, of course.
Who are these committees?
Well, I was going to say the conflict of interest of the legislature drawing their own districts is just phenomenal.
You don't even have to know anything about politics. Right. That just on its face, you go, well, that doesn't make sense.
Right, that doesn't make any sense at all. Right. Every state chooses these committees in different manners, and these committees have different powers in different states. They don't always work. In some states, they're subject to legislative approval, right?
Lipstick on a pig in that sense.
In that sense, as a matter of fact, New York is an example of that. New York has a citizen committee to do redistricting, and the Democratic legislature overrode it and drew their own maps, and then the courts overrode the legislature.
Huh. That seems like a big problem, but a pretty difficult one to address.
It is, and there are lots of things that we could do to eliminate gerrymandering. Again, at the federal level, you could pass a law. The courts could find a way to, and again, the federal courts, the Supreme Court has basically punted on partisan gerrymandering. Right, gerrymandering by race or ethnicity is illegal, but partisan gerrymandering, the courts have said we don't even know how to define it, so we're not wading in on that. Again, Congress could pass a law, or we could start electing people who are dedicated to eliminating gerrymandering, and there's many ways to do it. Right, you can adopt open primaries. Which helps open primaries with ranked choice voting. We just saw this in Alaska, that an open primary with ranked choice voting resulted in a more moderate Democrat being elected to their congressional seat than maybe a Sarah Palin, who might have won otherwise. I think one of the keys is we have this concept in this country of red state, blue state. Right, red district, blue district, right, and it's something of a construct of the results of gerrymandering, but it's also a construct of the media. There are no real, we aren't red state, blue state. We aren't red district, blue district. We aren't red neighborhood, blue neighborhood. We aren't even red household, blue household, right?
Or red or blue people.
We are exactly.
Take it down a list of 10 issues.
Exactly. Right? We are a kaleidoscope.
Yeah.
Right. Where I live up the road, for my state house race that's going on right now, a young man named James Tallarico is running as a Democrat, right? Hometown kid. He literally grew up a mile from where I live, right? His signs are all over the place.
I love that.
But his opponent's signs are scattered around as well. Okay, not nearly as many, but but side by side with the hometown hero signs. So even the street, the neighborhood, is not red or blue. It is a kaleidoscope, like I said. I think we need to eventually get to multi-representative districts. Right now, it's a one representative, winner take all, 50 that 50% plus one vote, and it disenfranchises a large number of constituents in those districts. In my last race, I got 125,000 votes. Okay, that probably represents 325,000 people in a 750,000 constituent district who feel like they're not represented. And because of gerrymandering, they never had a chance of being represented for the last 10 years, and they now no longer have a chance of being represented for the next 10 years. But if we had multi-representative districts, say, a larger district with 3 representatives for that district, you might get 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat out of that mix. And then you've got 325,000 people in that district who no longer feel entirely disenfranchised.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, sure. Their representatives are 2-1, but they at least have somebody
in their corner.
Yeah, exactly.
Couldn't they just do that? Do the same thing on a smaller level with what they're doing now with gerrymandering? If they had
it gets a lot harder. And I'm not a mathematician, so I'm not even going to try. But
I'm not either.
It gets apparently, if you get up to like a 5 representative district, it's basically mathematically impossible to gerrymander at that level. But like a 3 representative district is much harder to gerrymander than the winner take all single representative district that we've got.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we elect people that are campaigning on this. Has this ever been a conversation, nationally, that you remember anyone running for Congress that has ran on eliminating gerrymandering? I don't think I've ever heard it.
No, it hasn't really been. It hasn't been a national issue, right? It hasn't been it's not an issue that's been nationalized.
Yeah.
I think obviously the Forward Party is trying to raise the profile of this and trying to demonstrate to people how corrosive it is to our democracy and how it's contributing to the polarization that most people are reacting to right now. I mean, so many people. Whenever I have a Forward Party event, I like to go around the room and introduce yourself and why are you here?
Yeah.
And all of the why are you here answers are some variation of I'm sick and tired of the polarization that the 2 major parties are providing us, right? I'm tired of voting for the lesser of 2 evils. I feel politically homeless. I used to be a Democrat, but they moved too far left out from underneath me. I used to be a Republican, but they moved too far right out underneath me, right? It's all, in essence, dissatisfaction with the product, for lack of a different word, that the 2 major parties are presenting right now.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the Forward Party. So I guess this is why you're here again, back in politics.
Back in politics, yep.
So how did that go? So you ran twice. Sounds like from our conversations, you took a little bit of a break.
I did.
And what did you hear, within the Forward Party messaging? What made you want to get back involved, in particular with the Forward Party?
So after in November of 2020, I walked away. I said, never again. Not going to do this anymore. I'm going to go focus on job and family and all these other good things that I've neglected for the last couple of years. This system is rigged. This is hopeless. I gave it a shot. I couldn't get anything done.
Yeah.
And it was, I heard Andrew announce that he was leaving the Democratic Party and starting his own. I said, oh, well, that's neat. And
third parties pop up all the time.
Sure, yeah. Right. I actually like to use the word new party, not third party.
Sure, yeah, that's more accurate.
Try to get away from the connotation of a third party. And it was in January of this year, 2022. I can't even tell you what compelled me to go look at the website, but I went and I looked at forwardparty.com/Texas, actually just forwardparty.com, just to see what they were talking about. And I saw that the first Texas statewide meeting Zoom call was in a couple of days. And I'm like,
that's
right,
convenient.
I'll stick my nose in there and see what's going on, right? And it was one of the reasons why I said never again was because it's all rigged, right? And there's
what's the point? You're in
what's
twice.
The point? I just couldn't. Enough on that. They were messaging about everything that made me walk away. They were messaging about fixing the things that I walked away from. And that meeting lasted 45 minutes, an hour. I can't remember what it was. But I spun in my chair and I looked at my fiancée, Sarah, and I said, oh, shit. I got to get involved. And 9 months later, here we are. We're doing a podcast.
Here we are.
Yep.
So how did she feel about that? How did your family feel about that?
My kids are, it's a curiosity at this point more than anything else. It hasn't really, I mean, my kids are older now. 2 out of 3 are in college. One's a junior in high school. So they're a little less, dependent on family time like it used to be.
Yeah.
I'm not campaigning. So I'm not on the road all the time. I'm home. At this moment, it is from their perspective, this is more of
second job.
It's a second job. That's perfectly.
Yeah.
That's a perfect characterization.
Yeah. Okay. So you are now the state co-chair for Texas.
Yep.
How has that experience been? Has it been what you expected?
No, because I had no expectations at the beginning. I had no idea how this was going to roll out at the beginning. It was very grassroots at the beginning. From the original Forward Party of Texas people, I was the only guy who had ever run for office, basically. I was the only guy with actual political experience. And so because of that, I just morphed into something of a quasi-leadership position. And then we got news that Forward was merging with the Serve America movement and the Renew America movement.
Yeah.
And the Serve America movement in Texas especially was very well developed already, with a lot of people who had much more political experience. They had an executive committee already. They had a state chair. They had county chairs already in place. They didn't have grassroots, right? So as far as mergers go, this was like the perfect merger.
Puzzle piece fit.
Yeah, we were merging the grassroots side of the Forward Party with this sort of political experience and structure that, by the way, is mandated by and necessary in Texas to have.
Sure.
Mandated by Texas law. You've got to have this structure in place. And boom, all of a sudden this whole thing came together as a bona fide political party here in the state of Texas.
How's everything going? So we're as the Texas Forward Party, we were the first state to hold a convention. We're kind of the front runners. I think Andrew Yang said that.
Yep.
Christine said that at the convention. How are you feeling so far about Texas, our goals, just as the Texas Forward Party, how we're trending, towards the direction that we want to be going?
We are way ahead of anything that I could have ever imagined back, when we first started this.
Yeah.
And again, that's a result of a lot of hard work, obviously, but also the serendipity of the merger and what that merger brought to the table and how that merger restructured us. We currently have, there's 254 counties in the state of Texas, and that's a lot of counties, right? You need a state chair on top of all those counties, and eventually we'll get there. Right now we have, county chair. Right now we have county leadership in place in 16 counties here in the state of Texas. Mm-hmm. That sounds like a very small subset of the 254, and it is. But those are 16 of the biggest counties in the state of Texas. Okay. There are 10.7 million registered voters in those counties, more than 60% of the Texas electorate. We already have a leadership structure in place in those counties. And we're building out that leadership structure. You need precinct chairs, right? On top of that, you need grassroots organizers. We're building all of this out. And it ebbs and it flows. There are high points and there are low points. As you said, we had We had a convention. It wasn't a convention in the sense of or the classic sense of a political convention in that we were nominating candidates or anything like
Sure.
that. It was more rally than convention, and recruiting opportunity than convention. But on a day-to-day basis, more and more people are hitting that website and saying, "Yeah, I want to sign up for this. I want to know what you guys are doing." So we're growing both at the grassroots level. We're growing at the leadership level, and there's a long road ahead. It's challenging in the state of Texas. As I've said before, there are lots of barriers to a new party actually getting candidates on the ballot, but we've got a roadmap in place and we're executing.
Excellent. So is that something you're spending a lot of time on in terms of recruiting county chairs? Or how does that work?
Yeah, we're actively recruiting county chairs, and again, there are folks in the party who've got a lot of political experience. And with that political experience comes knowledge of other people with political experience.
Yes,
we reach out on a one-to-one basis, but we're not only recruiting amongst the quote elite, right?
Sure.
People are welcome to come to the forwardparty.com/Texas website, and I want to be a county chair.
Yeah.
I want to be a precinct chair. Go to that menu selection and put your information in. We have people rising up from the grassroots, volunteering for those roles as well.
So what would if there's somebody listening to this who's thinking, okay, I could probably be a county chair, what does that role entail? Or in the precinct chair?
So we'll start with the precinct chair.
Yeah.
It basically involves organizing your precinct. Right, and every county is broken up into voting precincts. If you're old enough, you remember the day when you only could vote in your precinct, right? Mm-hmm. You could not go to a different precinct to vote, and some counties are actually still like that. But the bigger counties, you can kind of vote anywhere these days.
Yeah.
But it is an organizing unit for the party, and your job as a precinct chair is to recruit other like-minded people. I mean, what is the role of a party writ large, right? The role of a party is to organize like-minded people to win elections.
Mobilize.
Period.
Like-minded people.
Organize and mobilize. Yeah. Right. So at the precinct level, you're doing things like you're recruiting people. You're recruiting people to knock on doors for the benefit of candidates. You're recruiting people to drop flyers on doorknobs of your recommended candidates. You are recruiting candidates themselves. We don't. Forward Party is not about a moonshot at the White House.
Yeah.
The Forward Party is about running candidates from the grassroots up, right? From justice of the peace to county commissioner, county judges, state legislature, Congress, Senate, then maybe someday when we establish this base, then the White House.
Addressing those root causes, right?
Exactly. So a precinct chair, you're basically, you get a few thousand voters in your precinct. Your job is to recruit as many of those as possible to the cause, get them to phone bank, get them to knock on doors, get them to the polls on election day. But there's a more important role as far as nominating candidates goes, in that you have to host a precinct convention, and that's mandated by Texas law. You must run a precinct convention. That precinct convention sends delegates to the county convention. The county convention sends delegates to the state convention. The delegates then vote and nominate candidates for office.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's because we are a new party. We will not nominate candidates by primary.
Right.
We nominate parties at our convention.
Okay. So, as a volunteer, the goal we consistently talk about is, coming up in 2024, we have about, 60 days to get 100,000 signatures in order to
Correct.
Get our candidates on the ballot. So, with that in mind, what happens after that? Are we recruiting candidates before that, and what is that all? What's the roadmap look like?
We're recruiting candidates right now.
Okay.
To run in 2024, and one of the little air quote again little gotchas, the little hurdles that the dominant parties had put in place in the Texas election code is not only that 90,000 signatures that you need to get your candidates on the ballot. And by the way, attendance at a precinct convention counts towards that 90,000. Attendance at a county convention counts towards that 90,000. So that's why those conventions are extremely important.
Yeah.
To be a candidate in the state of Texas, you have to file your paperwork. You have to file your intent to run by December of the previous year. So in December of 2023, if you want to be a forward party candidate in 2024, you have to file your intention to run. We cannot even get you on the ballot until starting in March of 2024. So there's a leap of faith that these candidates have to take that, okay, I want to run, I want to be a forward party candidate, but I trust you to get my name on that ballot come November.
So that's quite the sales pitch that you and the other leadership team are having to give.
This is the sense of urgency that we have right now to get our leadership structure in place, to get organized, to recruit candidates today for an election that's 2 years away, and to get our strategy in place to get those 80, 90, 100,000 signatures, whatever it turns out, whatever it has to be, so that we can assure those candidates, we can give them that assurance that, yeah, it's a slam dunk. Don't worry, we'll get you on the ballot.
What does that look like? I mean, if I'm somebody who's interested in the Forward Party, which I am, by the way, I've got one of those shirts at home. But what makes this different than? And you said you don't like the term third party. What makes this different from all those other parties? You know, the Green Party, the Libertarians. You know, all these different parties that don't end up doing anything except, you know, spoiling the election for, you know, the
take
party.
Votes away from the Republicans or the Democrats.
Yeah, exactly. Why is this different?
So there's two classes of different third party, if you will. Okay, there's what you just mentioned, the Greens and the Libertarians, and then there's the Ross Perot moonshot for the White House type of run. And you know the Ross Perot is a spoiler at the White House level, and the Greens and the Libertarians can be spoilers at the more local levels, right? Okay. The reason they're spoilers, and I'll talk about the Greens and the Libertarians. The reason they're spoilers is because they sit respectively further left than the Democrats or further right ideologically than the Republicans. So when they draw votes away from the Republicans. They draw votes away from the Democrats, right? But you're not going to get a hardcore Republican to go vote for the Green Party, right? You're not going to get a hardcore Democrat's not going to go vote for the Libertarian Party. So that's why they draw votes away from those parties specifically. If you can imagine the spectrum, right? The Forward Party wants to sit and draw votes equally off the Democrats and the Republicans, right? So that's one reason we won't be spoilers, is because we're pulling votes from both sides of the political spectrum. The other reason we won't be a spoiler, and coming right back around to gerrymandering again, right? You can't be a spoiler in an election that's been predetermined. You can't be a spoiler in an election that is rigged. What you can be is an alternative. You can be a new choice, right? And that's definitely where we want to sit. There's more than 500,000 elected positions in this country. Almost 70% of them go unopposed. You cannot be a spoiler in an unopposed election. You cannot be a spoiler in an election that has already been rigged. What you are is a democratic alternative to what the two major parties want to present to you. And this is why they put up such barriers to getting on the ballot, to becoming a party. Texas it's easy to become a party. It's hard to get on the ballot. Different states are different, right? Different states, it's easy to get on the ballot, hard to get to become a recognized party. They're all different, right? But the aim is all the same, which is to create political monopolies for the two major parties.
Yeah.
And, you know, I testified to the Texas Senate Redistricting Committee.
Really?
And begged them basically to draw fair districts, which of course I knew they wouldn't. They were all on their phones, not listening to me. But I equated these political monopolies to market monopolies.
Of course.
And
they're no different.
It's the same thing. It's no different. And what you wind up in with a market monopoly is what you wind up with in a political monopoly. A crappy product delivered at an exorbitant price. And that's exactly what we've got.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So as far as, are there anything you can tell me as far as like the everyone listening to this about the strategy? So are we targeting, actively those districts or those races when we're recruiting candidates where they're unopposed? Is that a strategic move that the Forward Party's kind of taking at the moment?
Yeah, it will be. We'll be evaluating every district we can evaluate, and again, whether it's a Justice of the Peace or United States Congress or anything in between, we'll be looking at targeting districts, of course, that we think we can be a major factor. Right? You want to win elections. You absolutely, especially here in Texas, where there is no ability for citizens to put a referendum question on a ballot and influence legislation that way. You have to win elections in Texas to influence policy. So yeah, I mean, all of these. It's a multi-dimensional evaluation. We'll have candidates who maybe want to run in a district that may not be the most beneficial district. The only way we'd ever discourage a candidate from running in a district is if they might play that spoiler role, right? Mm-hmm. Because one of our fundamental founding principles, of course, is vibrant democracy, and we're well aware of the possibility, certainly at the White House level, at the presidential level, or maybe even at a statewide level, of being a spoiler, right? And we do not want to move our democracy any further away from being a vibrant and lively democracy than it is right now.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So what does that mean to, the Forward Party? What does that mean to you specifically in practice? Obviously, I'll ask you the question without anything else. What does that mean? What does a vibrant democracy look like in practice?
What it looks like in practice is fair elections, people feeling like they have at least an opportunity to be represented in their government, mm-hmm. And people who are engaged in the democratic process because they feel that it's effective and it works.
Their votes matter. Their
voices
voices
count.
Are being heard.
And their voices are being heard, yes,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Makes sense. So as far as, this is probably going to, this definitely is going to air much later than the midterms. What are your thoughts? We're recording this on a Saturday. The midterms are in 3 days. 3 days,
yeah.
What are your predictions? What are your thoughts? How are you feeling about, just generally speaking, the midterms coming up?
At the state level, I think it's all a foregone conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, just given the polling and what I see is, I don't see the Democrats winning a statewide office. As I've said, most of the House races and the Senate races, the state House and the state Senate races are predetermined. So we already know the outcomes there. I don't think there'll be any surprises there. There may be one or two surprises at the House level. That would be about it. The Republicans will hold a solid majority in the House, in the Texas House and the Texas Senate again, and they will dictate legislation for the next 2 years, maybe for the next 10 years, given the state of gerrymandering. At the federal level, I'm going to wait until Tuesday night and see what happens, because polling is all over the place. We've seen polling in the last 5-6 years be less and less accurate, it seems.
Yeah, it seems like polling doesn't work anymore.
Well, here's a dynamic that I see emerging right now. And that dynamic is polling coming from the parties and the candidates, right? Lots of polls coming from parties and campaigns. And polls can be tweaked and manipulated, right? Mm-hmm. They can be. You can tweak the weightings on demographics because you only sample 1,000 people, right?
You can gerrymander the polls.
You can gerrymander the polls a little bit and make them look as good as possible, right? And what I see happening, especially in places like Pennsylvania, where the Senate race is really close, the parties are flooding the media space with polls that favor their candidates.
Sure.
And I see this, I'm not sure yet, but I'm seeing this as a new campaign strategy, right? If you throw enough polls out there, enough people are going to believe that Oz is going to beat Fetterman, or Fetterman's going to beat Oz.
And they're just not going to show up.
And they're not going to show up, or they're more motivated to show up. I don't know. Well,
yeah, we'll see.
We'll see how it all plays out.
Yeah, because you could see that going either way.
It can
If it's close and your guy's losing, your girl's losing, it's like, well, I got to get out and vote. And I wasn't necessarily going to if this person is up by 10%.
It'll be interesting to see how all this plays out. But we've seen polling be less and less accurate over the less and less predictive, I should say, over the last few election cycles. So I'm not going to venture a guess.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, actually, there's one thing I can guarantee you: 90+% of incumbents are going to get reelected, and one of the major parties or the other is going to have a slim majority.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna write that down. You're gonna
hold me to that?
I'm gonna hold you to that next time we talk. This is something, as you're talking about the state legislature here in Texas, and it's Republican dominated. Probably will stay that way. Where does the Forward Party fit in there? Do you feel like, is there an opportunity for Forward Party candidates or our messaging to kind of sway some of those Republicans towards our beliefs?
I think so. Yeah. And it's not even so much sway them towards our beliefs as it is give them an alternative that they can vote for that actually matches their belief. Mm-hmm. Okay? There are a lot of relatively moderate Republicans out there who will never vote for a Democrat. They just won't vote for a Democrat. There are a lot of Democrats out there who will never vote for a Republican.
Yeah.
Right? But there's certainly a swath of both Democrats and Republicans who, given an alternative that isn't those bad guys,
right,
that better matches what they're looking for, will be a reasonable alternative for them to vote for. Yeah. And that's what we're hoping to play on.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think you'd have to imagine a high percentage of voters fall into that category of, look, I'm dissatisfied with the R's or the D's, but not voting for the other one.
Yeah, for sure. And let me make a couple of points there about a large number of voters who are dissatisfied. There's close to 50% of voters in this country do not identify as either Republican or Democrat, somewhere between 42 and 48%, again, depending on the poll, right? What that means is that the Democrats and the Republicans are splitting the other 52 for whatever percent, right? What that means is both the Democrat and the Republican parties are minority parties, right? They just have a stranglehold on the electoral process. 62% of voters, people nationwide, say they would consider a viable alternative. They would consider voting for. And that's a nationwide poll. Texas is a little more conservative, but Texas, with 10% of the national population, almost 30 million people, doesn't sway all that far from national polling on topics like that. So there is a good, significant number of voters here in the state of Texas who are undoubtedly looking for something better, something different.
Yeah, I mean, that what an untapped opportunity.
Yeah,
exactly. If you're having those conversations, that's a market share, to think about it in business terms. This current product is not meeting their needs.
Correct.
They're not buying it.
Yep.
They want to, right? That's interesting. What does the future hold for Rick Kennedy in politics?
That's a great question. If you had asked me that question 9 months ago, you would get a completely different answer than you got right now. If you ask me that question in 6 months, you might also get a completely different answer.
Okay, that's fair.
I vowed, when I left, I said I would never run again. Never's a long time. So I actually also announced, when I announced I wasn't running, I said I was closing that door but not locking it. So kind of left myself an opening here.
You know what you were doing back then.
I have no immediate designs to do anything but continue to build this party. There may come a point in time where the dynamic changes and doing what I can to build that vibrant democracy changes to becoming a candidate. I'm not gonna lock that door.
Sure.
But I'm not aiming at a particular office at this point. I'm not aiming. I have no timeline. I am solely focused at this point in time in building the Forward Party here in the state of Texas, building a viable, durable, and competitive new political party here in Texas.
Love it. Living in the moment.
Absolutely.
Rick Kennedy, I think we've got the best state co-chair in the Ford Party in the U.S.
I appreciate that. It's very kind. Thank you.
Well, this was fun. Thank you so much for doing it.
I love doing these.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.